Should I record on Audacity?
Yeah. Okay. Getting everything all together. Okay. All right. I'm like focusing. Hello, everyone. I'm Ava Hoffman, and this is Outside the Lines, a Line Writer podcast where I interview Line Writer creators and talk to them about the artistry behind their tracks. Melisma has been posting Line Writer tracks to his YouTube channel since 2018. In that time, he has gone through many evolutions in his philosophical and artistic approach to line writer, from toy to game to art medium. A longtime quirker, Melisma has recently taken his technical and experimental eye not only to line writer's movement, but to its visual and narrative elements as well. And the results have been a body of work that is at turns diverse, entertaining, and deeply exciting. Melisma's work manages to capture a wide range of emotional experiences that are difficult to find well depicted elsewhere in Line Writer, and gives the viewer space to enjoy and appreciate the truths found in music that happens to be absolutely hype as hell. Today I'll be interviewing Melisma about gamification, which was recently featured at the number 10 slot of the top 10 Line Writer tracks of 2022. Combining advanced movement techniques with polished video gamey visuals, gamification manages to create an immersive visual experience that captures entering the flow state of a high-intensity rhythm game. Full of twists and turns that will keep you guessing about what will happen next, gamification is a wild ride that'll leave you laughing, energized, and wishing for more. I highly recommend you go watch it. Hi, Melisma. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm great. Ready to talk about gamification.
Yeah.
In your own words, describe gamification. Talk a little bit about what you find special or interesting about it.
Yeah. So gamification is just an embodiment of sort of all the different interests I've picked up in Line Rider, combined with interests outside of Line Rider that I've found in other rhythm games, and seeing how those two worlds interact. I tried to capture what it was like to play those games through my own experiences with those different games, trying to take inspiration, for example, from Geometry Dash, where on the original levels, the beginning levels that you're met with, trying to capture that like image and that feeling of playing it for the first time and getting introduced to the different mechanics, but also like trying to sync it with the song. That was a very important aspect of gamification, was syncing with the song and that rhythm aspect that you find in these different games. I think gamification was trying to capture the feeling of listening to music and moving along with it, or trying to use your motor functions when you're playing a game to move along with the music.
Yeah.
Also, part of what the goal of gamification was to utilize Quark specifically for that task, and all the different avenues that Quark has and its relationship with music.
Yeah, totally. How did you start making gamification? How did the project come into being? What was the process of making it like?
Yeah. So I think the start of gamification in my head was when I found this Schwank song, and I'd been listening to their work for a while now because I'd been getting into this game called Beat Saber, where you swing around different sabers and hit notes to a song, like another rhythm game, of course. So it was started by a rhythm game. But yeah, I was listening to this new Schwank song, and then I started listening again and again and again. I think the feeling it gave me was just fit so well with the aspects that I look for in rhythm games, which is the hyper intensity of trying to focus on the music and the different sections of the music that clash and develop ideas on each other.
Hmm.
Just that sort of rhythm game vibe to it. I think that's what made it so appealing to me, and how I was able to sort of like picture in my head how it could be made into like a line writer track. And I've sort of tried doing that for a lot of my line writer tracks, but this one just came more easily to me, and I just wanted to make a track out of it. But at the time, I was still making like two or three other projects, or working on two or three other tracks, like Sadie Sorceress and Drool, but I was really into this gamification idea, and like it wasn't gamification at the time. It wasn't going to be about rhythm games. It was just going to be like another hyper intense Quark genre track.
Mm.
So then just went into Line Art Advanced Community Edition to start making the track itself. I had been for a while trying to figure out how to make a track progress or like develop on ideas after Carbon Fiber and How. Carbon Fiber, I was struggling with that idea, and then How, I think I made steps in the right direction to figure out progression of an idea. So what I wanted to do with gamification was try and limit the intensity of expression until like the peak of the song. Originally, I started out with trying to make it all quote unquote flat sled. So that's where the beginning comes in, where it's just flat sled on a few horizontal lines, just writing down. Sort of like you would see in like I don't want to say like Doodle Chaos released to like stereotype, but like a more, I guess, accessible rather than like immediately out of the gate being like advanced Quark tricks.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to continue with this idea for most of the track. So at the time, my idea for gamification instead developed into trying to make an intense track out of not what was considered advanced Quark tricks or like technique.
Mm.
So that's sort of how I progressed with that idea and just started experimenting around with ways I could develop that or create powerful movement with some of those different techniques.
Mm.
So this would have been early October, I think, when I started creating it.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned before I was using Line Art Advanced Community Edition, which had added a 10-point canon generator, which would minimize the need and the grind to create those tricks. I used that a lot in this track, trying to. Well, first of all, there was this sort of. It seemed like this cultural push against using 10-point cannons after the generator had been created
Mm.
because of how easy it was now just to create this intense movement based trick out of nothing or minimal amount of effort.
Right.
And so 10-point cannons were seen as sort of this sign of being like a noob or not knowing how to do Quark. And I wanted to use 10-point cannons specifically, both because they were a powerful trick that you could do effortlessly, but also to push against that grain of only people that don't know what they're doing use these tricks or use this technique and this tool.
Yeah, totally.
So part of that was using 10-point cannons and flat sled for that sort of stuff. And then I also used a bit of this trick called sixth iteration, which there's this glitch where you can like make the rider look like they're gonna fall off the sled or make them move in different ways that are visually don't look like they're possible, but they are, and trying to emphasize that glitch in the music, but only using that later on. I tried not to use advanced or what were considered advanced techniques or as little as possible, just to try and focus more on the movement the Bosch is doing and what it's doing in relation to the music.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what gamification was, start to finish of the track itself, just condensing different not traditionally advanced techniques into a really advanced and hyper focused sync.
When did it start sort of becoming about rhythm games?
I think that was like halfway through the track. I was starting to figure out that the different elements of the song were divided in different sections.
Mm.
So I had sort of the geometry dash section, the movement was distinct from the following section, which was, I think, the dinosaur game. But because the movements were different, I wanted to emphasize the different movements in different ways. When I got to the Guitar Hero section, where he's moving up and down through the different like pinches or passages or whatever, it reminded me a lot of like moving up and down to different notes, like a rhythm game.
Mm.
And that's originally where the idea started. And then the following section, I was like, what if I tried experimenting with different games? So that's where the Trackmania section comes in, where he's going like around the spiraled lines, sort of like roads. And that was catered towards having this idea in mind that this is going to be about rhythm games. And then from there, I kind of just developed that idea and figured out which sections I wanted to be about which game. Some of the sections, like the Dance Dance Revolution section, weren't as planned out. There were more just general sandbox type movements. They gave me a lot of wiggle room for which game I would dedicate specifically to it. Like the Dance Dance Revolution section, Bosch is more just bopping to the beat rather than actually playing DDR.
Yeah.
So sections like that, I didn't really plan too much ahead. I just knew that I wanted something there, but I wasn't sure what.
Mm.
But sections like Osu, I was like, yes, this needs to be in there. So I had started planning out all of the sections following Trackmania, like writing them down what I would want them to be. So I sort of figured out that this particular part of the song would be good for Osu, and this other part of the song would be good for like Trackmania. But the tricky part was I had been developing this idea and sort of been steamrolling through the progress on it until I got to that one section right before the drop
Mm.
where I wasn't sure how to progress the different ideas or which games to represent in that section, where it goes super intense and the intensity ramps up to like 11 after the little like dialogue between the two writers.
Yeah.
I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to represent that section, and at first I was leaning towards a sort of boss fight type dynamic, like trying to fight this boss battle at the end of like every game, but the main reason I didn't do that was because it would be a lot of work trying to animate all that and plan all that. I was thinking it would be a lot more work than I'd be willing to put in for that type of ending.
Yeah.
Also, it wouldn't really fit with the rhythm game vibe. Like, I don't see a lot of rhythm games out there that have like a boss fight dynamic to them.
Yeah.
So instead, what I opted for was trying to look back onto this idea of progression, trying to work on that idea of like progressing ideas by using ideas from the previous part. So what I opted for instead was what you see in the final product, which is meshing all of those games together and sort of glitching through the transitions in like a hyper intense part.
Mm.
I tried planning that for each of the different sections. That's around the time I knew which sections I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But I think the entirety of the track was made without scenery in mind, or like the specifics of scenery in mind. I knew generally what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how I wanted to do it yet. And then I started planning out, still in LRACE, the different animations that I would need. So, like, for example, in the dinosaur game section, when the player is pressing the arrow keys, trying to animate that part, I knew I wanted that part in that specific section, so I got to work on animating that. And then once all the animations were done, for specifically all of the animations for the dinosaur game and the Dance Dance Revolution, um,
The key press animations.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, those are pretty strenuous to finish, but they were pretty worth it, I would say, in the end.
And then after that, I assume you moved it to .com because
Yeah,
you had to
yeah.
do all the color layers and things.
Yeah, so .com, I was getting really into .com's features at the time as well, like all of the different camera features that it offered and color. Color was a huge thing. And I sort of experimented with these in my untitled Melisma project,
Mm-hmm.
trying to experiment with the different features and test them out and see how they would function in the aspect of like syncing to music. But I fell out of that idea because at the time I wasn't really getting in, or I was falling out of Line Rider,
Mm.
and then I wanted to get back into a Line Rider. But with all these new features that .com offered, I was like, this would be perfect to like draw out these different rhythm games and more accurately represent them than just a black and white canvas.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with the camera, that would help a lot in the development process, especially on the OSU section. The still camera was done entirely within the .com like command line.
Yeah.
So yeah, the features that .com offered was a big help in the production process. I think I started working on that mid-October, I want to say. Just trying to design out all the different sections. It was a bit slow to start with the Geometry Dash section, trying to take inspiration from the background and the sprites or the assets it uses and the different images, like trying to match that over as accurately as I could. But once I got that section done, it didn't take as long as I thought, so I was like, I'm just gonna press on and continue this idea that hopefully won't take a long time. Because I was worried as well that it would turn it from a month-long project into like a year-long project
Mm.
with how much I envisioned it, but luckily it did not become that.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. Oh, I should mention that I think I was planning on using layer automation, another feature of .com, where you can like make certain lines visible at certain frames for like different animations.
Mm-hmm.
But I was planning on using that feature when I was started making the keystrokes and designing that in LineArt Advanced. I think I did all of the scenery for the rest of the sections, and then afterwards I focused on doing the layer automation, which was probably the heaviest part of the production time, trying to figure out animating all of that.
Yeah, layer automation is a nightmare to work with.
Yeah, it's a grind, but I figured out how to take a few shortcuts. I got all of the sections up to Osu done, and then once I got to that part, I think I had trouble with the line count because the file started to lag.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I had to split it into two files at that point, which I was frustrated to do because personally, my creation process in LineWriter is trying, even though even though it's the most like I put the most work on myself for doing this, but my goal is to use as little post production as possible
Right.
and make it as authentic or as like quote unquote pure as possible,
Mm.
which I think is a weird goal of mine to have. But I was just trying to do that, and splitting it into two files was frustrating because then I was like, ugh, it's ruined. It's not going to be one file. You can't watch it continuously. I don't know. But yeah, I had to split it into two files because the line count got too big.
Yeah, once you hit about 1.5 million, it's a nightmare.
Yeah, I think it was getting up there to the million mark, so it was like, okay, I'm just gonna split this. But after that, I finished the rest of the parts and it was good to go. And then I think I started after that working on the zooms and the camera controls. The Osu part was probably the hardest part of that because I had to get a still camera instead of moving the camera around like it normally does.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that is that I used a separate, like an injected script to change the behavior of the camera in ways you normally can't do with like the
Whoa.
normal command. So there was a whole situation there.
Yeah, I didn't know this, that there was like a script that you had injected the camera with.
Yeah, I had to update the camera smoothing, which normally it's the same smoothing throughout the whole track.
Yeah.
But I used a script to update it from 10 to 0 for that Osu part so that it wouldn't glitch out when it
Wait, you
shifted.
have a way to do that?
Yeah. It's a very makeshift way that probably shouldn't exist, but
Oh no.
I mean, it works. So that's what happens in the final track, is what you see.
The camera smoothing is like a nightmare that .com creators have been working around for years at this point. Uh,
Yeah.
the fact that you can't change the smoothing for different things. So I did not know that you had developed a script to fix that. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean it gets the job done is all I'll say. But yeah, I can share that after the interview,
No,
or it might
yeah,
be in the archives. But yeah,
no, that's sick.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that was the camera nightmare, and then I think after that the track was pretty much done. I did the one-eyed giant end. I took some inspiration from like the ending in like different rhythm games where you like just sort of the comedic ending,
Hmm.
but also like taking inspiration from the Line Rider culture of One-Eyed Giant being like a big classic of the line writer community.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like the ending of You Want It, your track. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's sort of where I took that inspiration with the sound effect at the end that's actually part of the song. I was wondering what to do with that and then decided on that.
Mm.
But yeah, I think that was it for the creation process.
Yeah.
It was like the biggest project I'd created within like the shortest amount of time, just 1 month of pure on and off grinding on it. I
Mm.
mean, it was fun, but it was like I was spending a lot of my free time on it just throughout the entire month of October. Yeah, it was certainly quite the effort, but yeah. I don't know if I would do it again. I mean, I kind of did it for Gaia, but that's a whole nother, yeah, that's a whole nother beast.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Much of your work features the in-depth use of some of the most technical features of LineWriter in order to produce new and dazzling visual effects. Take, for example, the surreal physics of How, or the fluid movement of lava at the end of Gaia.
Mm.
Gamification is no exception in this. As you just highlighted, used layer automation, animation, and intense quirks in order to immerse the viewer in the game playing experience with each new surprise or twist of how the track progresses. Why do you think your artistic voice is drawn to the technical complexity in LineWriter? And how do you think about the surprising and disorienting visual effects of your work, both in gamification and in your other tracks?
Yeah, so I've always been really interested in like the mathy and computer sciencey stuff. So I think part of it that drew me to technical, trying to think of the words here.
Nuts and bolts.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts of what makes the physics engine tick is like the math and the intricacies of how you can make Bosch move in that way, or just the underlying logic behind it.
Hmm.
I guess the best way to describe it is like my love for puzzles,
Mm.
trying to figure out it like a puzzle. I think that's what drew me to Quark when I first started getting into the line writer community. It's like a puzzle and trying to figure out how do I make Bosch 5, the gamification, if you will, of that aspect of line writer, but trying to figure out all the intricacies in the physics engine. And it was like, it's not really something you've ever seen before in a game as well. It's pretty unique to line writer and the way that it behaves.
Mm.
So when I first started getting into Line Rider, when I started getting into like the Quark side of things, I was watching a lot of what were popular in the community, like Quark tracks, and trying to figure out how they were done, how this certain trick is done, how Bosch moves in this certain way with this precision.
Yeah.
At the time, I was really interested in the technical sides of games. I was really into computer science at the time and how games were programmed,
Mm.
that programming aspect as well. I think that's what drew me to Line Rider. The Quark side is like trying to figure out all of those advanced and nitpicky things about the engine.
Yeah.
That's sort of where my interest arrived, was interest in sort of the rules of things and the puzzle-like nature of it, trying to figure out how it works.
Yeah, and then you started also applying that to things that weren't just the physics engine, like the layer automation code or the camera code stuff that you started playing with.
Yeah. And that sort of ties into, I guess, getting into the mod scene more so.
Mm.
At first, I was more into modifying Line Art Advanced because I was more accustomed to it at the time, using it for different Quark tricks and techniques. It offered a lot more of the different intricacies of the physics engine.
Mm.
I mean, it was more so like it was the popular choice for Quarkers in the community at the time that initially got me into it. But I got into the modding scene trying to figure out how to change certain things, little things about how the game worked or how the engine worked,
Mm.
like trying to make Bosch invincible or trying to make him invisible, or different things like that. And that's what sort of got me into the modding scene, is like trying to add more features that people might like to try out as well. So initially, it was out of a desire to find more ways to like break the engine and see how much I could break Line Rider.
Mm.
But following that, I think there was an interest in like exploring more of the possibilities of Line Rider as a medium and like trying to figure out how to make it more malleable, I guess.
Mm.
So yeah, I initially got into the LRA development, and then when I fell out of that, I had started getting into .com because I think this was around the time colors became a thing, and then everyone started getting really into how camera automations work and zooms work. I can't remember the specifics of it, but I was drawn to that, trying to figure out my passion for the coding scene in LRA and transferring some of that knowledge to .com. But trying to figure out that development was really interesting. It was like the puzzle of figuring out Line Rider Quark, or the engine, the physics engine. It was trying to figure out how to make the camera move in certain ways and how to reverse engineer all these different features. So that's what sort of drew me to the .com features, was that it provided a way to hone its power more efficiently, while also it was more like open source, I guess, or it was more like accessible in the way that it offered support for like add-ons,
Mm.
especially with the lineorder.com mods.
Right.
And that whole system added a lot more accessibility to me as a developer trying to figure this stuff out.
Mm.
Whereas the LRA, the development of that project, it was a bit trickier because it was made in a much more difficult, albeit more powerful language.
Yeah, .com is like in JavaScript. And what is...
LRA was made in C sharp.
Ah,
It's more robust is the word.
yeah.
So it was tricky trying to create a new feature when I had to add like 20 lines of code in Advance when I could add like 2 lines in .com.
Mm.
So that was what drew me to .com more, was that accessibility of development features.
It's interesting, this puzzle solving thing you've described, because it really feels like that in your Line Rider tracks, where you're sort of creating an odd problem for yourself, and then you're trying to solve that artistically and technically. Gamification has some of that. Gaia has a lot of that, and so does HAL.
Yeah. That's sort of what my interest in creating tracks nowadays lies in. Like you said, creating this problem or this story that I want to develop or this idea that I want to progress, and figuring out the different techniques and new techniques building off each other of how to do that. Just taking that piece by piece and like a puzzle, like figuring out the inner mechanisms of what would work best for it.
How do you think about the way you create visual effects in your work, both in gamification and elsewhere?
I mean, it's different in different cases. I think it's a case by case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
For something like How, it just started with me experimenting with a feature of LRA where you could change the skin, like the PNG file of the skin, and have it be something completely different visually.
Mm-hmm.
And then going from there with that weird idea and exploiting that without really thinking ahead of the visuals or how it would progress until later on. For something like gamification, I just saw the movement and it reminded me of this rhythm game that I played. And then I sort of progressed on that into where I visualize it as a gameplay experience playing rhythm games. And then for something like Gaia, I took this abstract concept of what I wanted to be and then tried scribbling it out in a draft. And then I was like, I kind of like this style of scribbles, so I'm just going to do that for the rest of the track. Yeah. So that, I mean, it was sort of case by case, I guess, but what those things have in common is sort of this idea I have in my head and then just narrowing it down to the ways I could progress it with different techniques that I know.
Yeah, you talked about the way gamification recreates a gameplay experience. And that's obviously sort of the most immediate and striking feature of gamification, the way it recreates these video games, Geometry Dash, Trackmania. And like you said, you're not just recreating the visuals, you're also like approximating aspects of their gameplay. And together they sort of form this stream of flow state experiences
Mm,
in intense gaming sequences
hmm.
in a way that is very reminiscent of what it's like to actually play a video game, right? Like it feels like playing a rhythm game tonally, right?
Yeah.
Why did you choose to depict the experience of playing a video game in Line Rider? And what did you want to say about video games with your work in gamification?
Hmm. I guess by happenstance, I was into Line Rider as a medium, and I was also really into games and video games and rhythm games specifically, but it was more of a personal challenge to myself, I guess. Like, how do these two worlds collide, and what is their
Mm,
relationship, and trying to figure out how I could emulate one inside the other. So I think it was just initially from a challenge like that, where I would challenge myself by figuring out what techniques I could use that Linearter offered to produce the effects that are seen in these games, or like try and produce the feelings you get when playing them.
mm,
So yeah, it was. I think it was from a place of technical challenge and trying to reverse engineer that problem. And then the history of Line Rider being gamified sort of like ties into that with the choices of techniques I used to represent movement
mm-hmm,
as opposed to how heavily I relied more so on visuals to focus on the intensity of the song. I was trying to combat the ideas of how to represent intensity with a song,
mm,
how you would go about using cork rather than visualization for that. So I think it came from a place of that, but that relationship with games, I think it comes from a place of the history of syncing in Line Rider. That's been a big thing since Colorblind was one of the first ones when it became an implemented feature.
mm.
But yeah, that's been a big history of Line Rider is how can you sync this thing to music, which had very like intimate ties with the idea of rhythm games where instead of trying to sync Bosch's movements, you're trying to sync your movements, I guess.
Mm,
A visual representation of like music in sort of a immediate and live context.
yeah.
So I think that's where that desire to create rhythm games specifically came from. My passion for rhythm games tying into my passion for Line Rider and its music sync capabilities, and trying to combine those two worlds.
Yeah, sometimes I think about it like Line Rider is kind of like a zero player rhythm game, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's very interesting in that aspect where it's like, I guess if you would classify it as a quote unquote sandbox game, but it's not really because, I mean, it's an extent to call it a game because it doesn't really have any goals or objective.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that's where the title gamification originates is that drive for line art as a game against it being an art medium
Mm.
and trying to see how those two worlds could interact, trying to push against the idea of what it means for line art to be a game.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny use of the word gamification, and I mean funny in a very positive way, where it's like, well, what if we replicated the visual artistry or like what makes video games powerful in Line Rider?
Yeah, coming from like a background interest as well in game design and game development specifically on the programming side of things,
Mm-hmm.
its ties with how it works as like not a game but a toy and the different features it offers, trying to figure out how those serve purpose as tools. I guess Line Rider could be also considered, this is a stretch, but a game engine
Mm.
where I've sort of like designed these games in this game engine or sort of replicated them, but you're not actually playing it. So it's more of a visual experience of those games.
Yeah. No, I think this is actually a really interesting idea that I think is true and resonates because you then made Flappy Bird and Line Rider, right?
Yeah, yeah. So Flappy Bird, that was an interesting challenge. At the time, I'd been experimenting with all of .com's features and trying to push it to its limits with like interactivity among like other different avenues I was exploring. But yeah, trying to figure out how you can make Lion Rider interactive in a way that wasn't just live draw or like drawing out the track while it's playing,
Mm-hmm.
trying to see if I could make it where you could actually interact with it like a game. And Flappy Bird was the result of that. I think that was the second game I made that was more like an official release. I
Mm.
had experimented with it in the early stages by trying to make tic tac toe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which actually has like a fully working wind detection system.
Whoa.
Yeah, that was a fun project. But yeah, trying to figure out how Lionheart could be also a game engine because it has this interesting like look to it
Mm.
if you're thinking of it from a user interface perspective. Like it has a simple minimalist style to it with just lines on a canvas. And how could that be used to represent various aspects of interactivity and visual stimuli?
Yeah.
But yeah, trying to think of that as a game engine was an interesting project. And I think they did cross paths in that experimentation, trying to represent games in Line Rider.
Yeah. And I do like this point about Line Rider being a game engine, right? Because if you sort of think about it, this is me gonna be saying something unhinged, right? But like a sheet of paper is a game engine, right? You know what I
It's
mean?
true, yeah. I mean that's so true. You can interact with it and play games on it. It's you can design like a tic-tac-toe board. That's game design. When you draw out a tic-tac-toe board,
Yeah.
or are you playing the game from that? Yeah, this is going on a tangent, but
No, no, no. It's
yeah,
really interesting.
yeah,
It kind of emphasizes to me that with Line Rider is an art medium, but we sort of play a select few games in the game engine of Line Rider. Like one of them is the zero player rhythm game, which is the music sync.
mm-hmm,
And there's some other things like you can draw things or some of the ways in which Quirkers have approached Line Rider.
mm-hmm,
It's a really interesting thought about what a medium is or game engines as a medium. Yeah, I think it's a very rich philosophical ground because it's like, what other games could we be playing with Line Rider, right?
exactly, yeah.
How do you think about music synchronization in your work? You've been saying a few things about Quirk's relationship to music sync. And yeah, your recent approaches to combining those two things has been particularly unique in the line writer space. Thinking about how can I make Quirk that serves what the music is doing or what the narrative is doing? So, how do you think about Quirk as part of your artistic voice? And what do you think about Quirk in general? I think you also have some unique takes among Quirkers about Quirk.
So trying to think about how to represent certain parts of different songs, I think my methodology with that stems back when I was really into Geometry Dash when I was a kid. I think playing that for a long time, getting into the ways that different levels were created and how you interact with the song through Geometry Dash. I think subconsciously I built a system of visualizing music through Geometry Dash. Like, how could this be a Geometry Dash level?
Mm.
In my head, I was thinking of it through that lens. And I think I transferred a lot of that experience with Geometry Dash to Line Rider, trying to visualize, okay, how could this be represented with what I know about Line Rider? Or if it can't be represented, what different aspects can I exploit that haven't been explored yet? So, trying to figure out that aspect of it is usually my initial thought process when I hear a song and want to try to do something interesting with it. So, I think that's how I approach music sync with Line Rider is just visualizing it in my head and picking out the techniques I know, but in a very like I guess this ties into my opinions on Cork, trying to not do it in like a monotonous or sort of like auto-tune way where it's just pulling tricks out of a hat and trying to like sync it to the music. I try to figure out how I listen to the music and what I hear upon first listening to it, and trying to best match that without the constraints of Quark. Like, I have Quark as a tool that I can use, but I don't want to limit myself entirely to it.
Hmm.
I want to use it in the context of some like interesting scenery or interesting camera work where it would best serve the song. But I think of Quark more as like a precise movement tool where you can do some really interesting things rather than the full on experience for the viewer. Like, what they should see is just a bunch of these lines that make no sense and just do stuff. Instead, what they should see is like not the lines, just the movement,
Hmm.
and then placed in this world that tries to best express what the music is saying. And I think a lot of that does definitely derive from Geometry Dash and their community. That sort of avenue is further emphasized with the addition of color and line art, trying to figure out how to use color to present what I feel when listening to a specific piece of music. But yeah, with gamification specifically, color was my main choice for the visuals because I think I said this earlier, like I didn't want it to be limited to the black and white canvas.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of wanted to truly represent all of the visual elements of the games. And I think part of the drive to not use heavy Quark was because in most electronic based songs, that was the first choice is to go all out Giga Quark and like make some crazy stuff happen,
Mm-hmm.
which I didn't want to do. It's been done over and over, and I was kind of getting like tired of that formulaic approach to interacting with electronic music.
Yeah.
This probably is another point of discussion is electronic music. Being really into that and trying to see how I can represent it with the tools that LineWriter offers.
Mm.
Trying to figure out how the certain glitch in the music could be represented by a glitch in the writer's sprite or a glitch in the scenery visuals or different things like that. So I think part of my approach to music is influenced by that inspiration from electronic music.
It's really interesting because there has been a lot of electronic music that's been sort of put into line writer tracks. But with your tracks, there's some of the first line writer tracks that I feel like are like really listening to the electronic music. It's not just this thing happens on the beat. You're sort of really trying to capture the emotion of electronic music. I'd be really interested in hearing like your thoughts about line writer and electronic music.
Yeah, so I guess this would tie into like my interest in figuring out the advanced techniques in the engine and the different modifications you could add to LineWriter to sort of add features to the engine, as well as this progression or this idea of progression that I've been experimenting with
Mm-hmm.
that have all channeled into my interest into using electronic music in LineWriter. And I think LineWriter as a digital medium really helps that case of like how you could use frame precise visuals and specific technicalities involved in LineWriter to represent the technicalities involved in electronic sounds
Mm.
and how those two worlds sort of interact.
Totally, totally. And something you actually mentioned in the previous question was about the use of color. The use of color in Line Rider seems like something you've been drawn to for a long time, even in tracks as early as 2018's Barbra Streisand.
Yeah, that was more at the time. I think it was just more of like, hey, this looks cool. I'll just do it. And I wasn't really think of like how it actually interacts with the song. It was like a new glitched build of Art Advanced where it just added these weird color effects.
But I think it's indicative of what you've been drawn to, right?
Yeah,
It meant that you're sort of one of the first Quirkers to really embrace the use of color. You're one of the few line writer creators who has been combining Quirk with color visuals in gamification, the Melisma project, and Gaia. So I was going to ask a little more about what your approach to color in line writer is and how you go about combining movement with color and with your artistic goals.
yeah. So I don't think I had a big approach to color before color was introduced. Like, I wasn't really pushing for Liner to have color, but when it became available to me, I started thinking of all the possibilities I could do with it and how it could change how I think about syncing in Line Rider.
Mm.
But I think it was a big help to have that Geometry Dash background, which had a lot of that involvement in color and how color interacts, feeding my interest in how color could interact in Line Rider and how it could evolve to interacting with Quark in interesting ways. But yeah, color, the way I use color is to just illustrate what I see in my head when I visualize tracks. I just try to like start out with an image or an online reference maybe of like what I'm visualizing that's actually real and not in my head, trying to figure out like how I could best represent that image in Line Rider and taking inspiration from that and using the different color features for that and trying to match the image that you see while the music is playing with the color. It sort of creates this incidental effect where the color is adding to the music in a way that I might not have intended. I don't know if I would say I engage a whole lot with combining color and movement, or I don't really consider the effects that color has on movement as much as I could, which could be an interesting avenue to go down for future tracks, like the effect that color has on movement. So I think or I don't want to say I have room for improvement, but it could be an interesting project to figure out how color specifically ties into the effects of music and the effects of movement.
Yeah.
But I think I've had some instances where I do give intentional choices to color and what colors I use, but I don't think I overall typically consider color as a tool that could work well with those other tools. I think my intentions lie in the overall experience and how color is a tool and movement is a tool that could serve into this overall purpose for the viewer. But it would be an interesting conversation interacting with those tools and seeing how they serve each other.
Yeah, totally. Gamification also contains within it what feels like a bit of a commentary on Line Rider as a whole, right? Very sort of talked about this. Gamification as this word that has a lot of associations attached to it in the Line Rider community, specifically around Rabid Squirrel's video essay, Line Rider, the Gamification of an Art Medium. And the games you selected don't necessarily feel like random selections either, as we've been talking about. Many of the games are rhythm games, and some with some pretty close associations with Line Rider, like Geometry Dash, right?
Yeah.
You also feature a few meta commentary in-jokes in the track, like the differences between the .com and LRA versions of Line Rider, and that one-eyed giant reference at the end.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think you were trying to say about maybe Line Rider's relationship with itself in gamification? And what do you think about Line Rider's capacity to comment on itself?
I think to start off, you mentioned that section with the two Bosches contrasting LineRider.com with LRA.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I was trying to paint a picture of was the divide between .com and LRA, the stereotyped users of like artists versus corkers, where the corkers, there's this idea where they have this drive to like try and get respect for Quark and trying to enforce it as like a serious avenue of artistic expression, which it is, but in the way that it's communicated, it's a little more like, I guess aggressive is the word, where there's not a lot of room for like what you can do with Quark alone. But as a tool, it's an effective way to get precise movement for what you want.
Yeah.
But I think what I was trying to say with that whole conversation was like, with the LRA Bosch telling the .com Bosch to like go harder and go faster and go more intense with the song, was just adding to this idea that the way to engage with electronic music is that you have to pump it up to the max and like go to 11 per se with your Quark to the point where it's basically incomprehensible. And that's the only way to represent it properly, which is not a great outlook for electronic music. It's a very limited scope of what you can do with it. So I think that's part of what I was trying to say with that, and that sort of ties into why I use specifically flat sled and 10-point cannons, was that you don't have to just use advanced Quark as a tool or advanced techniques, quote unquote, of Quark. You can use different ways of movement and still get the intense result. But another part of that was the sort of toxic culture with Line Rider Quark. I guess competitive is the word, but like to a not very fun point where it's extremely over gamified. I mean, the community at this point has gotten a lot better about this now, from what I've noticed.
Yeah.
But before gamification was made, this was sort of discussing that whole 10-year background of Quark, where it was this competitive ground of who could outperform who and who could do the best tricks with the least amount of red lines or no red lines at all. Just all of these different challenges, which, I mean, from a puzzle perspective, that's part of what brought me to Quark and the part that I enjoyed. But from, like, I guess a mental health perspective or like an enjoyment perspective, that kind of sucked the fun out of Quark, trying to engage with that competitive aspect.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do was, I think I figured out a while after, I think it was sort of a slow process of figuring out that with Line Rider, I didn't want to adhere to the same formula of using Quark over and over. And instead of getting hyperfixated on the nitpicky details for the sake of being competitive and being the first one to do it, I instead wanted to see, okay, how can I use this to engage with this music in a more accurate way? The way that I listen to it.
Yeah.
Another element of that toxicity sort of underlies in gaming communities as a whole, including those rhythm games that I represented, where there's that competitive aspect of doing intricate tricks. Where I experienced this the most was probably the Geometry Dash community, trying to get into like the more and more difficult and nuanced levels. I would watch as people in the community just spent days doing attempts on a level over and over just to die over and over again. And that sort of turned me away from Geometry Dash, that progression of skill.
Yeah.
It's less about, I mean, there is an element of skill to it, but it was a lot more about the tedium and the time put into that, rather than like the performance itself, how it represents the music. So that's what fueled me away from Line Rider core competitiveness, is that initial disgust for like the competitive culture of rhythm game communities and competitive gaming in general. And there is some enjoyment to be found in competitive gaming. I'm not saying that it's bad and you should never do it.
No.
But just the way that it's presented as this, you should always be doing better than everyone else. It's had a history of turning a lot of people away and like making something anti-accessible if your ultimate goal is to surpass everyone else from the onset.
I get what you're saying about competitiveness. I find it a lot less satisfying when it's like, oh, I'm like competing to someone else's puzzle, right? If we want to put it in terms of puzzles, right? I think it's a lot more satisfying when you create a puzzle for yourself or a challenge for yourself and then you complete it. Instead of like this competitiveness, it's a self-directed engagement with something. And there's still a competitiveness to that, but not one where it's like, who's the best, right? It's like, what am I able to do?
Yeah, I think that's what kept me going with Line Rider, trying to figure out how I could use what I learned from Quark and push the limits of what is possible with music syncing and the visual possibilities of Line Rider in general. And I think that's definitely an important aspect of gaming in general, not to get caught up in comparing yourself with other people, but trying to challenge yourself at your own pace.
Yeah, no, I think it's such an important thing. I think games are for everybody, right? And Line Rider is for everybody, and it's about engaging at your level.
Yeah.
Final question, and then I'll let you go.
Right.
What do you hope for from the future, both in terms of Line Rider and in terms of your life and the world?
I think I mentioned this way at the beginning when I was talking about my purist ideology around creating in Lion Rider. I want everything to be in engine. I don't want to use any post production methods with Lion Rider. And I think what I hope for is that everything you can do in an editing software, you can do in Lion Rider, but in a more accessible way without having to go through the hoops of like trying to make a script for this certain camera feature or trying to learn how to code just to make layers turn on and off. I want you to be able to like do all of that within the constraints of just opening linearter.com, sort of for that accessibility purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that I've had that drive because part of it comes from wanting to make something that's purely authentic from the perspective of gameplay or like video games, trying to make it so that you didn't like cheat. So I think part of it comes from that sort of unhealthy rabbit hole of like wanting it to be the most authentic or like prove that you can do it within these certain constraints. But I think it would be beneficial for the community as a whole because it would make it more accessible if you didn't have those sort of editing tools. Where if I started with Lion Rider, or when I started making content in general, I didn't really have a lot of access to those editing tools, and I didn't really know how to utilize them properly. So what I would do is, coming sort of from my figuring out puzzles background, I would try and figure out, okay, how could I make this effect or replicate this effect best with the tools that I've got? But I think I hope for the future that you don't have to do that and that it can be more accessible and easy to do. You don't have to use an external source to do it.
Yeah.
And I think for my life in the world is that I don't know.
Those are the big questions.
Okay, yeah.
Getting real.
I guess we just keep existing. We're existing, and Lion Rider is an art medium that exists in this world that we exist in. And I think it can be used to make interesting and beautiful things in a way that no other medium can really fully touch on the way Lion Rider can. I don't know. That's an answer, I guess.
Neatly sidestepping, what do you want from your life? But I understand.
Lion Rider, that's what I want.
You want Line Rider from your life?
Lion Rider.
Line Rider for life! Let's go!
Yeah!